Hey everyone, it's Brandy and welcome back to my channel, Brandy Janae's Bookshelf. This should be the final week of all of my 2021 wrap-ups. I decided that I wanted to do a combined video for both my worst reads and DNFs. I was going to do separate videos, but I realized that the majority of the books that I read this year were actually 3 stars and above, and I think 3 stars is actually a decent rating. So looking back over that, it was only a few books that I think got below 3 stars. I think the only other thing that I needed to mention before even starting this video is that it's going to be like combined, like I'm going to be going back and forth between my worst reads and DNFs. I think mostly because I wrote them down in like the order that I read them in, because I was just going through my spreadsheet for 2021 to try to find all of these books. So I think I found everything. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about is actually one of my worst reads of the year, and that is What Big Teeth by Rose Szabo. In this story, we're following this character named Eleanor Zarin, and at the beginning of the story, she's actually living away from all of her family at this boarding school. There was this incident that happened when she was younger, and I think because of that, her grandmother sent her off to the boarding school. And at the start of the story, another incident happens with one of the other students at the school, and she is really scared about the consequences of that. So she decides that she's going to run away back home to where she thinks it's safest for her. But once she does finally get back home, she doesn't receive the warm welcome that she was expecting from her family. And the rest of the book is her like struggling to try to fit in and find her place back with her family after not being with them for so long. So as far as this book, one of the main things that I had a problem with is that it felt like it was maybe 2 to 3 books that were kind of put into one, and it didn't always make sense. And that was made even worse by the writing style / pacing that was used. I initially was trying to read this one physically, or I had an e-arc from the publisher. So I was trying to read this before it came out, and I was struggling to get through it so much that I ended up like stopping at some point, and I was just like, I will finish it, but I need to have the audio because there's just no way that I'm going to be able to get through this. Like if I didn't pick up the audio, I would have ended up DNFing this. This is how slow and how like random kind of at times the pacing and writing style was, and I just wasn't clicking with it at all. And it was just like everything that could possibly be wrong with the story was wrong with it, and I was just like not a fan of it at all. So the next book that I have to talk about is actually one of my DNFs. I think possibly my first DNF of the year, and that was Wings of Ebony by JL. And this is a YA, I think more so urban fantasy than anything else, following Rue, who is half human, half god. Before the start of the story, her mother is killed in what I believe is like a drive-by shooting on her porch, and as a result of that, her father shows up to take her back to live with him in Gaizan, which is like the world where the gods live. And her younger sister Tasha is taken in by her father's family. Rue is dead set on living her life with her younger sister Tasha, even if that means breaking the rules of Gaizan and leaving when she's not supposed to leave. And she decides to go check in on her sister, which is how the story starts off. And in doing this, she ends up finding out that there's this evil lurking in her childhood neighborhood. And at some point in the story, she finds out that the same evil is actually lurking in the Gaizan. And I think it's about her like having to embrace her powers and who she actually is, to kind of stop that evil. This one, I ended up DNFing this like I mentioned, and I think the main reason had to do with the fact that I just read this at the wrong time. I think I started off reading this physically and then I eventually have moved over to audiobook. But I think because of my mood and how I was feeling about reading at that time, I might have been like in a slight slump. This book was just not clicking with me, and I feel like I'm such a mood reader, and I had a feeling that if I was reading this at a different time, I would have absolutely been in love with it and flying through it, and that just wasn't the case. So I decided to put this down so that I didn't like force myself to finish it and then end up hating it because I was reading it at the wrong time for me personally. So I put this down. I do have this on a list of books that I would like to pick up, like that I'm excited to read, especially because the sequel, and I'm pretty sure that is a finale to the series, is coming out this year. I think it's actually coming out in the first half of the year. So I want to get this read and hopefully enjoy it so that I can move on to the next book. The next book that I have to talk about is also another DNF, and that one is Super Mario Manga Mania by Yukio Sawada. And I realized while going to get this off of my shelf that I also forgot to add another DNF to this list. So I'm just going to talk about this now, even though this was a DNF for later in the year, and that is Kirby Manga Mania Volume 1 by Hirokazu Hikawa. Both of these are essentially the same thing for like different franchises. They're a collection, like a manga collection of short stories dealing with, I think they're both video games. I know Super Mario is. I believe Kirby is a game and not like a TV show or manga series like I initially thought. I think otherwise it wouldn't be called, you know, Manga Mania. I got both of these in a Manga Spice Cafe box, not the same one obviously, but I wouldn't have picked these up if I hadn't received them in a box. I did attempt Super Mario. I think I got through maybe like 1.5 stories, maybe even more than that. I don't remember, but I did try this one. I think I read a couple pages in Kirby and I was just like, this is giving the same vibes as that Super Mario, so I decided not to continue on with that one. I don't have any strong connection with the storyline where I want to read more short stories about either of these. This just wasn't appealing to me. There was nothing that I was particularly interested in, and as I mentioned, if it weren't for that box, I wouldn't have even tried to pick these up in the first place. The next book that I have to talk about is Training My Heart to Love You by Monica Walters, which is an adult romance that I picked up from Kindle Unlimited. This one is a dual perspective story following Caitlin Aber, something along those lines, and Zaysin Ardoin. But Caitlin basically makes her living working and / running a nonprofit organization for, I think, like teenage girls. I don't know if it's just teenage girls or just girls in general. And at the start of the story, Caitlin is trying to think of some programs that she can start with the girls of the organization that she's running. And eventually she decides that one of the things that she wants to do with the girls is to start a garden. However, she doesn't have any experience. She calls up her cousin, asks if he has anyone who could help out with this, and he recommends Zaysin. Cut out a bunch of stuff. Zaysin ends up coming to the facility to check out the area that she wants to start the garden in, and they have an immediate attraction, and it's kind of just following along with their lives from that point on. I think that it had the potential to be like a new favorite of mine, but there were a couple major things that really just kind of took away from the whole story. I think I ranted about this in a wrap up. So you might remember me talking about this if you've been on my channel for the year. So starting off with the thing that wasn't as bad of an issue, I guess, for me, is that everything was like super dramatic. Like everything that could possibly happen or everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. And there was just like no lulls in the story. You know how you need like kind of those down moments so that the big moments are like really impactful, really meaningful. This story didn't have those down moments. Everything was just like it had to one up itself, and I was just like, we need just some like chill moments, and there weren't any chill moments. It was just like too much at times, especially considering this book was like, I think only a couple hundred pages. It was just a lot. It was a lot. And then the major thing, I think, going kind of along with that really bothered me about this story was that we couldn't have a genuine reveal ever. And what I mean by this is that, you know, normally when you read a book, you go through it, and then you go to the scene and something happens, and that's the reveal. But in this story, we would have, like, we would be getting towards the end of a chapter, or whenever something big is about to happen. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this because I'm making it super complicated. So we will have the character that something is either about to happen to, or it's like someone from their family or whatever. And then we would have our other main character. They would come in and be like, oh, I heard this, I hope that doesn't happen. So there was like a moment where something was going on with Jason's brother, and Caitlin ended up hearing about some situation because obviously she was with Jason at that point. And at the end of the chapter, she's just like, oh, well, I hope this doesn't end up happening to him. And then literally you turn to the next chapter right after that, and then it's just like, oh my God, this thing happened. And it was just like every single time something was about to happen, the other character was like, oh, is this gonna happen? Oh, I hope that doesn't happen. Oh, this or that. And we never gotta just them living their lives, and then next moment it's like this big dramatic thing, and it's like, oh, okay, everybody's all shaken up because this happened. We couldn't really feel how impactful that was because the person told us before it would happen, and I was just like, why? And I think that really ruined the book for me because it was just like every little thing was always somehow known by the characters, even if it was just like they heard one little like piece of a conversation. They would go to the other character and be like, oh, I heard this, is this about to happen to you? And then, you know, of course the character would be like, oh no, da 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 da, and then we go for it, and then it's like, oh, here's this thing that's gonna happen to you that was literally just mentioned 2 seconds ago. So I'm not gonna keep repeating myself. It was just it was very frustrating, especially because I wanted to love this book so much. I think that I would have enjoyed it otherwise because I thought the romance was really good between the two characters. I appreciated the fact that this was a romance between two black characters, which I feel like I definitely don't read enough of. And just to have those things just keep constantly happening, I was just so freaking upset, and it just took so much of my enjoyment away. But anyway, this one ended up getting 2 stars for me. I did say that I want to give the author another try because I'm hoping that she has improved or gotten away from that, but I just have not picked anything up yet, so I don't know. I can't give an opinion on that. But anyway, moving on to the next one. This is the last one that I actually finished. Everything else that I talk about after will be DNFs or books that I decided to put down for one reason or another. This is actually another manga, and that is After School Hanako-kan by Adaro. Going along with the theme of the other two that I talked about, this is actually a collection of short stories taking place in the world of this manga series, which is Toilet Bound Hanako-kan. This is most likely going to be the wrong terminology, but this basically felt like fan service, just like giving fans like an extra little bit, a side story, one for a money grab, and then 2 just because some people like to see characters like this just like randomly outside of the main story. Sometimes I feel like that could be done really well. In manga, sometimes I feel like it's harder because they spend so much time focusing on certain things that little silly things like this aren't going to appeal to everyone, and this definitely did not appeal to me. I think maybe a lot of that had to do with the fact that I had not read the series. Once again, this is another one that came in a Manga Spice Cafe box, and I knew that was bound to happen, to get things that I wasn't going to enjoy. However, I wasn't expecting so many mangas that are included that are like things that I almost feel like you need to read something else from the series. At least this was the only one. The other 2 were like video game based mangas, which I think that in itself was just like the wrong way to go about things. But this is not a review of that company. This is worst reads in DNF. But not having read anything, I just felt like this wasn't the best read for me at this time. It got 2 stars. I thought some of the stories in here were cute, but for the reasons that I said, I just felt like this wasn't for me, at least at this time. All right, the next book that I have to talk about is Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton, which is, I think, like a new adult maybe. I don't know if it really matters what age category is for, but this is like an urban fantasy paranormal romance. I'm not really sure which category this falls into because I DNF'd it. This book is following Fortuna Sworn, who is the last of her kind, and after her brother's disappearance 2 years ago, she's been determined to find any clues on what happened to him and maybe even how to get him back, until one day she catches the eye of a powerful fae and he ends up offering her information on her brother if she agrees to fulfill his desires. I kept this very short and sweet and simple because I felt like based off of the description that I read, I was getting a whole different vibe from the actual story. Because of that, like, it completely threw me off having it start off completely different. It's just, I guess my expectations that I had when going into this were just not met, and because of that I was just like, I know I'm not enjoying this. I don't know what this is supposed to be. I'm not loving it like everyone else seems to be. And then eventually, I think at that point, I went on to Goodreads and I started like reading reviews, not just looking at star ratings, and I think a lot of people ended up giving it 4 stars or higher because of the ending. And then I was just like, okay, well, maybe I can try to read to the ending. And then I just was like, that's not gonna work. Long story short, this just wasn't giving what I thought it was going to, and I didn't feel like it was worth it to continue. With that being said, I decided that I don't want to completely give up on this. I felt like I put so much effort into it, and it seems like something that I would very much enjoy, that I'm going to give this another shot this year. I think if not this year, it'll happen. But instead of trying to read it like through ebook, I'm gonna actually pick up the audiobook so I can like just get through the beginning of that. The next book that I have that I DNF'd was The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This one is a fantasy book following Nari, who has never believed in magic, but after she accidentally summons a Jinn warrior, her entire life changes. So this was actually one of the books from my 12 must reads of 2021. I was kind of bored with it, and I ended up like putting it down to read something else that I was more interested in at the moment. And then I forgot that I was reading it and just never picked it back up. And when I did remember, I had kind of forgot things. It ended up being a little different than what I was expecting it to be, and there was like a whole different perspective that I didn't know about going into the book. I thought this was going to be like following one main character in her life after discovering she has magic, which is pretty much how the description makes it out to be, but there is a whole nother perspective, and I was bored with that. And it was just like every chapter kind of switched off between the two of them, and I didn't really care about that second perspective because I didn't see the significance in that, probably because I didn't get far enough into it. This is one that I want to go back and try. Hopefully going back into a couple of these books with different perspectives, knowing what to expect ahead of time, will be a little easier. This is another one that I feel like it is one that I would enjoy, but I need to push past like that beginning bit, I guess, of it before I get super deep into the story. So I will be trying this one again. I don't know when. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but at some point I would like to try it again. Moving on, the second to last one that I have to talk about is Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. This story is following this character named Clay Cooper, who was once part of one of the best mercenary bands that ever existed. Now they've all grown old and grown apart, but one day one of the old band members shows up at Clay's door asking him for help to save his daughter because she's trapped in the city that's under siege. And it's just following them as, one, they're going to try to find, I think, as many of the old band members to come help out, and then 2, making their way and possibly eventually saving the guy's daughter. I felt like this was taking too long to get to the point. It just feels weird because like things that I normally enjoy, it just seemed to be dragging out so much, and it was just something about this. It's another book that I put down to pick up something else, and then eventually forgot that I was reading it. And once I went to try to go pick it back up, this one, it wasn't that I forgot things. I just really didn't care to get to the end. I think this is one that would make like either a really good movie or really good like short mini series because of how things are set up. But as far as reading it or really just listening to the audiobook, I was just like, this isn't hitting again. It just wasn't giving me what I wanted it to give. So I decided to DNF it. The final book that I have to talk about, and probably like the most anticlimactic one, because this one was just like not an intentional read, that is Dead in the Water by Haley Edwards. And this one is following this character named Camille, who is working as an investigator, has a special ability when she touches something. I think she's like able to see everything that has happened. I don't know if it's like in an entire lifetime or a certain time period. Pretty much what we see is like whoever she touches, how they got murdered or killed or whatever it is that happened to them, she's able to see that. And then a normal job that she's on ends up going sideways because one of the victim's brother decides that he has to join in the case. I'm not going to tell you any more than that because that's pretty much all I got, and that's after I ended up starting this one. This one is, I think, the most random of all of them because I accidentally started reading this. I did not intentionally pick this up. I've mentioned this a couple times now, I think probably in wrap-ups. I was listening to another audiobook through Audible, and every now and then it does, I don't know if it happens with every book. I feel like this is like me repeating exactly what I said in whatever video that was. But I don't know if it happens every single time, but usually most of the time when I'm listening to an audiobook, if I let it play all the way to the end where it goes through all the credits and things like that, it'll say, hey, maybe you should check out this book. And if you let it sit, it'll start playing. Now I'm used to it playing a sample and then that's it. But for whatever reason with this book, it literally started playing the entire book from the beginning. It gave me the description and then the audiobook started. And I think it was actually about to happen again recently because I have another book like in my Audible library that I didn't check out. It's not through the Plus catalog. I don't know how I got it, but it was like starting to play because I was listening to something else, but I was doing something with my hands or my phone was like across the room or something, and I just didn't stop it, and it was about to do the same thing. So I see that this is kind of common, possibly for Audible, I don't know, but I listened to like half of this book, and it was one thing because it was interesting because it was a paranormal world. There was a lot of different magical creatures, and like thinking about it, if I really try to think about it, it was things that were really catching my interest, which I think after a certain point I just didn't stop because I was just like, oh, I want to know what's happening, because it was like murders happening and this girl's trying to figure out what's going on, but her ability, it was a lot. And I just wanted to know what actually was going on, and I was just like, oh, okay, well, I got halfway through this book. I wasn't meaning to read it, but because of that, I'll just pick it up and finish it off tomorrow because I think it was like a couple hours left for the second half of the book. And and I was just like, oh wait, I don't think I remember enough about what is actually happening or like the details of what's going on to really care about finishing it off. So I just decided not to. So that's what happened with that, really. I'm pretty sure that that was the last book that I had to talk about. At least that's the last thing that I have written down. So if I forgot anything, sorry. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you had any, let me know down in the comments what were some of your worst reads of the year, or if you didn't have any, let me know some of the books you decided to DNF, because I would be curious about that, or if you DNF, I guess, because I know everybody doesn't do that. I think this is probably the first year that I intentionally had more than one DNF for the entire year, which is great. That, I think, is the end of this video. I've already taken way too long and I have 2 more to film, so I'm gonna go. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to give it a like if you enjoyed, as well as subscribing if you have not already. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you again in the next one. Bye.